The Pacific Northwest is one of the busiest regions in the United States for mixed freight or manifest rail traffic. In particular, Washington State is home to several regularly operated local freight trains, as well as short-distance manifest runs, sometimes referred to as haulers. While all of these freight trains have their own unique elements of interest, one of the most special is a train that is formally recognized as M-EVESUM, the Everett to Sumas, Washington Manifest. This train hauls cars northward where they are either delivered to one of the industries located in Sumas or interchanged with the Canadian Pacific Railway and the Southern Railway of British Columbia. Arguably, the most unique thing about this train is the route it travels. While a little less than half of the trip is over a portion of the BNSF Bellingham Subdivision, which runs between Everett and Blaine, Washington, most of it is on the rails of the BNSF Sumas Subdivision. This is a very lightly used rail corridor, retaining the feel of a much older rail line with many old bridges, line-side infrastructure such as crossings, and of course, the rails themselves. The Sumas Subdivision still, for the most part, uses sectioned pieces of rail that are bolted together at the ends, as opposed to the modern welded ribbon rail that has significantly fewer gaps between sections of rail. The result is the hypnotic sound of steel wheels dancing over the joints between the rails, a sound that is now almost non-existent on the railroads of North America. This older infrastructure has survived on this rail line only because it is a lightly used secondary route. In fact, the M-EVESUM and its southbound counterpart are the only two regularly scheduled trains to traverse this rail corridor. Speaking of the rail corridor, let's briefly examine the route of the Everett to Sumas Manifest. The train travels along BNSF's Bellingham Subdivision from Everett to Burlington, Washington. This line was originally built by the Great Northern Railway's Seattle and Montana subsidiary in 1892. At Burlington, the M-EVESUM leaves the Bellingham Subdivision and enters the Sumas Subdivision. The first segment of the Sumas Sub travels northeast from Burlington along US Route 20 to Sedro-Woolley and was originally built by the Seattle and Northern as part of their line between Anacortes and Rockport. It later became part of the Great Northern's branch line to Concrete. At Sedro-Woolley, the Sumas Subdivision turns to the north, leaving former Great Northern rails and entering former Northern Pacific trackage for the rest of the journey to Sumas. This stretch of track was part of the Northern Pacific's 5th Subdivision, traveling in between Seattle and Sumas. The Seattle, Lakeshore, and Eastern built this railroad as a way of connecting Seattle with the Canadian Pacific Railroad at the international border. Following the official May 1, 1891 completion ceremony, the railroad operated for a decade before the Northern Pacific formally purchased it in 1901. For nearly 70 years, the railroad continued to see a regular stream of train traffic. When the Northern Pacific merged with the Great Northern along with several other railroads in March of 1970 to create Burlington Northern, the Northern Pacific 5th Subdivision was deemed to be redundant, as trains could use the Bellingham Subdivision for access into Canada. As such, Burlington Northern abandoned most of the portion of the 5th Subdivision south of Sedro-Woolley. Burlington Northern maintained the line in between Sedro-Woolley and Sumas as a second port of entry into Canada, utilizing the Great Northern's concrete branch between Burlington and Sedro-Woolley to access the surviving remnant. For the second video in the Following a Freight Train series, we will follow the M-EVESUM on its journey through scenic western Washington, beginning in Everett and traveling all the way up the Bellingham and Sumas subdivisions to the Canadian border crossing in Sumas. Since this train makes no scheduled intermediate stops to serve industries or rail yards in between Everett and Sumas, our focus will be on significant places along the railroad, particularly on the Sumas Subdivision, as this is a historically rich and very scenic rail line. We begin our trip along the rails of the BNSF at Delta Yard in Everett, Washington. This is one of the busiest freight rail yards in western Washington, with several trains originating and terminating here on a daily basis. It is also a junction point between the BNSF Bellingham Subdivision and the Scenic Subdivision, which travels from Seattle to Wenatchee by way of the famed Stevens Pass. Throughout the day, older EMD general-purpose locomotives shuffle about the yard, sorting cars to build various manifests bound for destinations including Spokane, Pasco, Longview, and Custer. The Everett to Sumas run is typically a 5-day-per-week operation. Trains are most often found leaving Delta Yard sometime in the afternoon, Sunday through Thursday, although departures are occasionally at different times depending on track work and other conditions. The return trip from Sumas to Everett is almost always made under cover of darkness and operates as L-NWE 644, or Northwest Division Local Job Number 644. Locomotives used for the run to Sumas are usually 4-axle general-purpose types, although larger 6-axle Special Duty Series units have also been used on rare occasion. Anywhere from 2 to 4 GP-type units are assigned to the train depending on loads. Trains have been known to operate with anywhere from about a dozen cars to just shy of 100. The train has been assembled and is on the move out on the Bellingham Subdivision. Upon leaving Delta Yard, the railroad navigates due north through marshland and across several bodies of water that empty into nearby Puget Sound. Trains must first cross through the large swing bridge at the mouth of the Snohomish River, then over an open-deck concrete span across Union Slough, and then over 2 more swing bridges through Steamboat Slough and Eby Slough. BNSF 2635, a GP39-3 type rebuilt from a GP35, slowly leads its train across Union Slough as it leaves Everett and approaches Marysville. Typically, northbound runs to Sumas are mostly empty cars, while southbounds are loads from Sumas and Canada. Lumber products are some of the most common bulk commodities hauled on these trains, along with grain for animal feed and Washington State's Waste by Rail program. Once all the bridges have been cleared, the M-EVESUM rockets up to speed as it passes Cruce Junction. The BNSF branch line to Arlington leaves the Bellingham Sub at Cruce. This branch is former Great Northern trackage between Cruce and Edgecombe, and then ex-Northern Pacific 5th Subdivision the rest of the way to Arlington. On the northwest side of Marysville, the train has turned to the northwest, passing English Siding. This is the first of 3 passing sidings on the railroad in between Everett and Burlington. Continuing on through the Stillaguamish River Valley, the M-EVESUM makes good time midway between Savannah and Stanwood. On days with no other train meets, the M-EVESUM will fly along at full authorized speed all the way, making the trip from Everett to Burlington in about an hour. Stanwood is the second passing siding the M-EVESUM encounters on its journey on the Bellingham Subdivision. This siding was extended in 2011. BNSF 2599 accelerates out of the curve with a 97-car-long train bound for Sumas. In Conway, our train zooms past the Conway Animal Feed grain elevator just after leaving Snohomish County and entering Skagit County. The grain elevator here is served by one of the locals based out of BNSF's Burlington yard a few miles to the north. South of Mount Vernon, the M-EVESUM passes through the farmland of the Skagit Valley as it nears the third passing siding on the Bellingham Subdivision. BNSF 2584 makes some noise as the engineer sounds the horn for several road crossings in downtown Mount Vernon. The train is passing the Mount Vernon Amtrak station, which replaced the older depot in 2004. With over 35,000 residents, Mount Vernon is the largest city in Skagit County as well as the county seat. The M-EVESUM crosses over the Skagit River Bridge, leaving the city of Mount Vernon and entering Burlington. This bridge was built in 1906 and is slated for replacement in the very near future. Nature abounds in this part of the country. If you look hard enough, bald eagles can frequently be found nesting in the trees along the banks of the Skagit River. The river plays host to a variety of fish, including multiple different species of Pacific salmon, a staple in the diet of the eagles. BNSF GP60M number 155 has slowed its train as it passes through the Burlington yard and prepares to enter the Sumas Subdivision. From here on, the train will be under an older form of railroad dispatching known as Track Warrant Control, or TWC. Under TWC, train crews request permission from the railroad dispatcher to occupy a given piece of track for a certain period of time. Once they have traveled over the section of track, crews release their track warrant back to the dispatcher. TWC is commonly used on lines that see lighter traffic levels and do not have many, or in cases such as this, any advanced line-side signaling systems. In contrast, most mainline railroads in North America use a system known as centralized traffic control, whereby dispatchers electronically set up paths for trains to take over the railroad, remotely setting switches and signals to optimize the smooth and efficient flow of railway traffic. At one time, the Great Northern Depot sat right in between the two sets of diverging tracks just to the south of the Greenleaf Avenue crossing. The main line continued to run due north from here before curving toward the water for the trip into Bellingham. Switches came off the Bellingham subdivision going both southwest toward Anacortes and northeast toward Sedro-Woolley. The M-EVESUM comes around the curve off the Bellingham Sub as it turns to the northeast, following US Highway 20. To the right is the Burlington Chamber of Commerce Visitors Center, built as a replica of the former 1890 Great Northern Depot. The town of Burlington was incorporated in 1902, and the settlement traces its beginnings to a logging camp. In 2020, the city's population was just over 9,000. Many old wooden bridges, such as this one between Burlington and Sedro-Woolley, are scattered along the Sumas Subdivision. The line is dotted with other old infrastructure such as mechanical crossing bells and plenty of jointed rail. In recent years, BNSF has invested more funding into improving the Sumas Sub, with more welded rail, upgraded crossings, and many new concrete bridges. Sedro-Woolley was formed in 1898 with the merger of two neighboring towns, Sedro and Woolley. As of 2020, it had a population of about 12,400. Like many towns in this part of the country, Sedro-Woolley's history was very much shaped by the lumber industry, and various tributes to this heritage can be found throughout the town, including this display in Harry Osborne Park featuring steam locomotive number 2 of the Puget Sound and Baker River Railway. The crew of the M-EVESUM has slowed the train down as it approaches town, crossing Highway 9 and West Ferry Street. BNSF 2599 brings its train carefully round the curve at the site of the former railroad junction in Sedro-Woolley, leaving former Great Northern Rails and entering the Northern Pacific's 5th Subdivision. Trains must slow to 5 miles per hour as they negotiate the tight curve at the junction, changing from a mostly easterly direction of travel to north and entering the 1.1% grade out of town. At one point, 3 different railroads all met at this junction, which was often referred to as the Woolley Triangle. In addition to the Seattle Lakeshore and Eastern Railroad and the Seattle and Northern Crossing in Sedro, the original line of the Fairhaven and Southern from Bellingham also passed through this location on its way to coal mines located near Cokedale. The old F&S grade out of town toward Bellingham is now a road, and the Great Northern right-of-way from Sedro-Woolley to Concrete has been repurposed as a recreational trail. The Northern Pacific to the south is mostly abandoned, but portions have also been rehabilitated for recreational trail use. The railroad crosses over combined Highway 9 and 20, leaving the historic Sedro-Woolley downtown district behind. With a friendly wave from the cab, the crew of the M-EVESUM accelerates their train out of Sedro-Woolley as it crosses a quaint wooden trestle over Sap Road. BNSF 2584 continues to work hard as it brings its train closer to the top of the grade, approaching the Garden of Eden Road crossing. The tracks have made a nearly 180-degree loop through Sedro-Woolley, and the train is now heading mostly west. At Grip Road, the train has greatly picked up speed as it turns back to the northeast. The railroad crosses over Prairie Road just north of a small siding known as Thornwood, as it heads due north through groves of fir trees. A mile north of Thornwood Siding, the M-EVESUM meets Highway 9 at the first of several at-grade crossings. The highway was realigned through here in the recent past, moving the crossing a couple hundred feet to the north of the previous location. The M-EVESUM crosses over Thunder Creek and past the Hathaway Road crossing, continuing through the peaceful tranquility of the Samish River Valley. BNSF GP60M 155 brings its train north through Wickersham as it enters Whatcom County. Wickersham was the junction where the Northern Pacific's Bellingham branch split off from the 5th Subdivision, traveling to downtown Bellingham by way of the north shore of Lake Whatcom. The Bellingham branch was originally constructed by the Bellingham Bay and Eastern Railroad in the early 1890s to connect coal mines and logging camps along Lake Whatcom with shipping ports in downtown Bellingham. Northern Pacific formally purchased the railroad in 1902 and continued to use it up until 1970, when the Northern Pacific was merged into Burlington Northern and the route became redundant. Today, a short portion of the branch between Wickersham and Lake Whatcom survives as the Lake Whatcom Railway. The valley opens up to rich farmland to the north of Wickersham. In the distance, the North Cascade Mountains paint the backdrop for the perfect picture postcard scene. Acme is a quiet community located between Highway 9 and the BNSF Railway about 4 miles north of Wickersham. There is a small maintenance of way spur which sees seldom use. The sound of BNSF 2584's horn breaks the calm of the summer afternoon, announcing the arrival of the M-EVESUM as it crosses Highway 9 and rolls through town. The M-EVESUM leaves the town of Acme as it approaches the crossing of the South Fork of the Nooksack River. Initial construction of the railroad reached this point on December 1st of 1890, with the rest of the line to Sumas completed just 6 months later. The next settlement along the Sumas Subdivision is the small hamlet of Van Zant. A former logging campsite, the community is named after its first postmaster, J. Milner Van Zant. The post office here remained open from 1892 until February of 1955. Shortly after passing through Van Zant, the train and railroad cross over the North Fork of the Nooksack River at the confluence of the North and South Forks. This is the second and final crossing of the Nooksack. At dusk, the M-EVESUM comes through a broad, sweeping curve to the west along the Nooksack River as it approaches Deming, Washington. Locomotive 155 brings the M-EVESUM through Deming just before sunset. BNSF occasionally stores cars on the siding located here. The jointed rails sing out as the train rolls through town. In the late afternoon light, Locomotive 2599 leads its train through the trees as a mountain formation known as the Twin Sisters looms in the distance. This mountain is part of the North Cascades Range, and the taller southern peak stands at just over 7,000 feet in elevation. The cows at a small farm off Highway 9 don't seem to care too much about the train as it crosses Cyper Road. Looking in the opposite direction to the northwest, we see the train passing the EPL feed elevator. EPL was established in 2011 by Land O'Lakes Inc. and the Ellenboss Company to provide animal feed for dairy farmers. In the past, the feed elevator at this location was served by a road switching job that ran out of Sumas. In one of the most picturesque scenes on the entire Sumas Subdivision, the M-EVESUM passes a raspberry farm with the snow-covered twin sisters in the distance. The mechanical bell at the Highway 9 grade crossing sings out, warning motorists of the approaching train. Like many others on the Sumas Sub, this crossing features warning lights but no gates. On a different day, we see a much later M-EVESUM passing through the crossing in the fading light, with the Pacific ranges of Canada's coastal mountains in the distance. BNSF 2669 rolls along through a gentle curve to the north, passing by several more berry farms. Sumas is not far ahead. The train crosses once again over Highway 9 as it travels along the edge of the town of Everett and into Nooksack. Nooksack is a quiet town of about 1,300 people that is located on the southern edge of the Sumas Prairie along the Sumas River. The town was founded in 1912, borrowing its name from the Nooksack Indian tribe. There is a small industry spur and transloading facility in Nooksack located next to the CHS Northwest Propane Terminal. The Sumas switch job occasionally drops off tank cars on the spur. With more farms in the background, GP39-3 type number 2586 heads through the broad curve on the north side of Nooksack, turning to the northeast on final approach to Sumas. Cutting across another field, the M-EVESUM crosses Highway 9 for a final time, about 2 miles out from the end of its journey. The train has made it to the south side of Sumas. However, the work for the crew is not yet over. Train cars must be spotted or positioned on the siding in Sumas to wait for the switch crew. Depending on how long the train is, the crew of the M-EVESUM may have to split the train into two sections so as not to block the Morgan Avenue road crossing. This process can take a while, but once the cars have been spotted and brakes set, the power will be taken off and moved to the main BNSF yard in downtown Sumas to wait for its next assignment. Sumas was incorporated in June of 1891, just over a month after the railroad arrived from the south. The town is home to approximately 1,500 residents and during the late 19th and early 20th centuries served as a base camp for miners involved in the gold rush in the region. Off to the east, the 10,700-foot peak of volcanic Mount Baker can be seen behind the foothills. Sumas is a border town, and as such, much of the economy is supported by international commerce. At one time, both the Milwaukee Road and the Northern Pacific Railroad maintained border crossings here. Milwaukee Road went bankrupt in 1980, selling off all company assets, including their line in between Bellingham and Sumas. Burlington Northern purchased the Milwaukee Roads line from Bellingham, which was largely abandoned shortly thereafter due to a bridge fire in Everett. Burlington Northern and later BNSF continued to maintain the stub end of the branch in Bellingham and the Milwaukee Roads line between Sumas and Linden, Washington. Freight service to Linden was discontinued in 2019, and the branch is now partially used for railcar storage. BNSF still serves several industries in Sumas. One of the biggest customers is Republic Services, which loads trash onto railcars for shipments south and east along the Columbia River to the Roosevelt landfill in eastern Washington. EPL Feed has another grain elevator in Sumas, and covered hopper cars are regularly spotted at the facility. A third major industry receiving both tank cars and covered hoppers from BNSF is IKO Pacific Inc., a company that makes asphalt roofing shingles. In addition to these three industries, there are a few transloading facilities that take cars from BNSF. A transloading facility is a location where loads can be moved between different modes of transportation, typically from truck to rail or vice versa. The largest transloading facility in Sumas is Teal Jones Lumber Service, a lumber yard that loads processed timber onto center beam flat cars after being shipped in by truck. Two other smaller sites, Martin Feed and the Bulk Haul Rail Spur, receive various rail cars, most often covered hoppers. Cars that aren't destined for one of these industries previously mentioned are most likely bound for Canada. Interchange between the Canadian Pacific Railroad, Southern Railway of British Columbia, and BNSF occurs right at the border port of entry, with locomotives often crossing into the other country to exchange cars. Once all cars have been switched out and a new train has been assembled, the southbound 644 local will return with a mostly loaded train from Sumas to Everett. On a spring afternoon, we are greeted by a very unusual surprise, as former Burlington Northern GP40E 3009 leads a rare daylight 644 local south through the town of Acme. An overcast summer evening finds an early 644 local heading south across the Skagit River shortly after entering the Bellingham Subdivision on the return trip to Everett. And with that, it is time to bring our journey to a close. Thanks for joining me for this look at the scenic Sumas Subdivision and the Everett to Sumas Manifest Freight Train. If you enjoyed the video and would like to see more on individual freight trains in the future, hit the like button and leave me a comment down below. As always, a big thanks to all my supporters on Patreon. If you'd like to see notifications whenever I post to YouTube, click on the subscribe button and select the Receive All Notifications option from the pull-down menu. For even more great train and railroad-themed content, check out my other social media pages. I'll be back next Friday at 9 a.m. Pacific Time for another new railroading adventure right here on the YouTube channel. That's it for now. Until next time, I'm Mike Armstrong. I'll see you down the line. Thanks for watching.